A lot of time and investment goes into making a really good sounding audio system. But how does that actually take place? How does one go through that process of setting up an audio system to make it sound good? On this episode, I sit down with Andrew. He is from Bangkok, and just like me, he's really passionate about audio. He's been solving some really challenging problems that churches have had, and I figured that I'd get him on to talk about it. Also, stick around for the end where we discuss about some tips on how you can optimize your audio system. So if that interests you, stick around. That's on today's episode of the Adventist Music. Welcome to the Adventist Music Podcast. I'm your host, Khan Elmers. This is the podcast where we share Adventist musician stories in under 30 minutes. Well, today we have a very special guest all the way from Thailand, Andrew, kind of a musician, but also into audio engineering. It's good to have you on the podcast, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. You have a background in music production, but you currently study aerospace engineering.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Before we dive into the sound ministry side of things, I'd love it if you could explain to us a bit about like how you chose to do aerospace engineering. Could you explain why you chose that route and the projects that you're currently involved in?
Sure. So this is actually an interesting story. I was debating between going into music or going full engineering. And in the end, I chose to do engineering because I never really wanted music to become work per se. I wanted to always have music as more of a hobby, of a distressor, so that whenever I have like a ton of work or a lot of things to do that are stressing me out, then I can always turn to my violin, always turn to music production. And it's worked out that I turn to music whenever I'm stressed. And the more interesting thing is when I was deciding what university to go to, I applied to several. And the only door that opened for me in that their interview wasn't on Sabbath, or they didn't have requirements that I couldn't meet because my exam grades came really late because of exam retakes and stuff. I wasn't able to meet the application deadline, and so I had to take the GED. And the only university that accepted GED and didn't have their entrance interview or exam on a Sabbath was this aerospace faculty. And so that was the only door that opened for me. And so that's where I am.
It's
God was like,
yeah.
that's where you're going.
It sounded like you didn't have many options.
Yeah, because the way it works is I took A level, so you have twice a year where you do exams, you sit exams, and then the rest of the year you just have to study for them. And so I had to do a few retakes, and so that delayed my applications to university. And then when it came time for the results to come in, they were going to come around like 2 weeks after the application deadline for the round that was for me. And so I just had to scramble to do the GED in a week, and I passed, and
Wow.
God made it possible for me to go.
Congratulations. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
So watch this space, soon to be aerospace technician. But yeah, in today's episode, we're going to explore your story about music and that
Yeah,
side of your world as well. So let's just dive right into it, shall we?
yeah, sure.
Mentioned that you play the violin, you do that to kind of wind down, to relax. Take us back to the time when you started learning how to play the violin.
I started at 4. I was the one who actually asked my parents for a violin, and they got me the violin, and I was really, really excited to play it. What I was most happy with was getting to play in church, getting to share music. Although a lot of people do play the violin, I find that I love putting more of my classical music background into it. And so what I really enjoyed was discovering ways to tie in my classical background after getting to the point that I was able to. It was always, from the start, it was always really exciting to see how people reacted to music. It's like people connect with you differently when you play music and when you versus if you just talk to them. If you play an instrument and they play an instrument, it's an immediate connection point. Or some people might really enjoy a certain style of music, and being able to play that kind of music for them really just connects you instantly.
But you mentioned that your mum gave you a violin at 4 years old. So let's go back to that
Yes.
moment where she gave you that violin. That's a pretty young age. And do you remember anything about that time?
I think if I remember correctly, it was my birthday gift because I
Okay.
I had been really asking for a violin. And so at the birthday party or something, I remember there was a gathering of relatives. They handed me the violin and I was just so happy to play it. After many years of playing, like I started at 4 and then around 2017, 2018, I was just like really tired of playing it because I just played, practiced week after week. Every single Sunday you go to lesson, and then during the week get lazy to practice. The same story for I'm sure a lot of musicians. And that was a really hard period. My parents had to move me to another teacher, and I started with Suzuki, but that other teacher that I went to, he had a different method and he just gave me a really hard piece just so that I wouldn't stop playing. His job was to keep me from stopping playing, and the piece was just beyond my ability that it made me like strive to get that piece. And it was Bach concerto in A minor, I think. And so for one whole year, I just played that piece over and over and over. And it was just beyond the level of my ability to the point that I just wanted to get to it. That kept me playing. And then besides that, in the church where I went to, we had a new pastor's family come in. The wife, Miss Shim Hye-hyun, she was a classical pianist, classical concert pianist. And it was just so different. She arranged music in a very classical way. They really reminded me of like the romantic and classical eras of music. And that was something that was so different because at that time I'd never really been able to play sacred music that was written for violin or was written for violin and piano or violin duets that was more classical than anything, because a lot of the time they take these songs that are more for voice and then they just do really simple like two-part harmonies or stuff like that, whereas her arrangements and the artists who she took inspiration from took their classical background and really put the musicality and the technicality into the music, and that makes it really enjoyable to play. During that time, I also discovered Korean CCM. I discovered through her Soma Trio and Jennifer Jeon on YouTube. And if you haven't listened to these artists, you definitely should. Their arrangements of very well-known hymns like Amazing Grace, Blessed Assurance, many others like the Lord's Prayer are
Mhm.
so musical. They're just so different. The way they move through the ideas, the way they modulate to keys. Sometimes they have like 3 to 4 modulations on just one song. And while it's very technical, their music is so beautiful at the same time. And so it merges these two things that we as musicians really love. And there's something for everyone, whether you're a musician and you can appreciate the musicality, or you're someone who just loves listening to music and hearing the same hymns. There's something for you in their arrangements, and that's something that I really enjoy about their music. And so that's how I kept playing.
I see. So you are currently studying at university doing aerospace engineering. Um, Tell us, when did you begin going there?
I've just finished my second year.
Second
So
year,
I
right?
yeah, so
S-
I started 2 years ago.
So when did you You said that you were involved in church ministry doing sound engineering.
Yeah.
Um, Tell us about like some of the work that you're currently doing there.
Yeah, so I I was born and raised in Thailand, and now I serve at the Bangkok Seventh-day Adventist Bangkok Korean Church, and I serve as the head of AVL, audio video and live streaming, and as well as front of house. So I started 2 years ago, or three now, with transitioning from my studio recording side to seeing the need for audio engineering in our church because, or yeah, front of house and live streaming in our church.
Can we talk about a bit more about your background though? And you mentioned that you used to do stuff in audio music production. Did
Yeah.
did that set you up? I mean, it sounded like you were doing that before you got into this whole church audio space as well.
Yeah, so during the pandemic, we came off that 2017, 2018, 2019 period where I had gotten back into music with the people from my church, especially my pianist friend and her daughter. We would play duets all the time. And then came the pandemic and we were all at home. And something that came out of that was Amazing Facts Youth, which was started by Uncle Tony Scarpino at Granite Bay Seventh-day Adventist Church. At first, for the youth of his church, we really, really wanted to share our music. And so during lockdown, I just decided to start learning to record with whatever I had. At that time, I just had a webcam mic that was surprisingly decent enough to use up to a certain point. And so I started recording with that, and then eventually we got a shotgun mic to record videos. Weren't really happy with the sound of that, so we went and got a Zoom H2N, and then finally some actual small diaphragm condensers. Little by little, I learned through YouTube and with whatever I could find that was like free because we didn't have that much of a budget for recording. And so I found a free DAW, which I still use today, a traction waveform, because of the way the workflow is. The routing is very flexible. I started learning, and it was very, very difficult at first because I'm sure many people have heard violin recordings on YouTube done by people, and it just sounds very, very harsh. Like the mid range, high mid range of violin is very harsh. So that was what really pushed me to learn proper audio engineering, which was to mix my violin so that I too would enjoy listening to my music recorded, because everyone was very surprised by me recording and everyone was saying that they really loved my recordings, but I myself wasn't really happy with how my instrument sounded, how my voice sounded in recordings. And so I wanted to make the most of the gift that God gave me, the talent for playing the violin. And I wanted to share how I myself hear my violin under my ear and in the room, which is very, very full and very like resonant sounding rather than harsh. And so I started learning all the techniques, EQ, dynamic EQ, compression, and all that. I eventually got to a point where I did enjoy music production and recording myself and actually listening to my recordings. It just so happened that that was the time that I saw the need to help churches out, help my church out with sound. It took quite a few years.
Let's talk about that a bit more.
Yeah,
What was going on in your life at the time?
I actually only transitioned from studio sound to live sound very recently, as I said 3 years ago, which was when I did started doing it for my church. And then little by little, I started getting opportunities at other churches, like whenever there's like a school event or another church had an event. And I knew a bit about sound, and so I started going to other churches to help. And so, yeah, I started helping churches out. And here and there, I've been getting opportunities to work with other churches besides my own and help them with their sound.
So it sounded like it kind of grew organically through your relationships at church that you were forming there at the time. Yeah. I
Yeah,
definitely want to come back to some of the things that you did there at those churches and see
yeah,
if you can
sure.
give us some tips to help people to optimize their church audio. Because for those of you guys out there who have a church audio system that maybe you have no idea how to run, um, we definitely want to help you guys out and answer some of your questions that you have. So
Yeah,
let's come back to that. Before we do that, though, I'd like to talk to you a bit about church audio, some of the project. Let's talk about like a real project that you have done, and
yeah.
some of the problems that you faced and how you solved them.
One project that I've worked on was when our church choir was invited to sing for the North Asian Division ASI conference that was held here in Bangkok last year, I think. Yeah. And so I wanted to multi-track record our choir to post to our YouTube channel. And so the week before the conference, I got the information that it would be held at this church only 2 weeks prior. So
Hmm.
the next week after that, I decided to go to the church to like scout out the location. When I got there, it was something. They have an X32 compact, and I booted up the mixer, and it was on the old firmware where you can't remote into the console at all on a tablet or a computer. So they said that they wanted to update the mixer, but they didn't know how to. They asked me to try. I asked around if anyone had a thumb drive so that I could update the mixer, but it was Sabbath afternoon and everyone had gone home and nobody had a thumb drive. And so I had to dig around in my bag for an SD card, and I had an SD card reader on me. So I formatted that SD card, downloaded the firmware, and by the time I had done that, it took quite a while because we had to go look for the storage to do it. And then when I finally got it updated, I plugged it into the router, and it turned out that the router's Ethernet was on a completely different subnet from the Wi-Fi. And so we still weren't able to mix on the tablet. I decided to just work with the mixer. So the next thing I did was go to the front of the church to their stage box and look at what they were doing. And on the stage box, it was all plugged in what looked to be correctly. And then I went to the back, I checked the channels, and the mics were all on random channels.
Hmm.
Like some vocal mics were on channels 5 and 6, piano was on channel 2, and they had some wireless mics. And so I tried to organize stuff. I tried to get things to a point where I could work with it, and I did. And then I discovered that their wireless mics were sharing a receiver. So they had two wireless mics that were on one receiver. I I was stunned. Like, I don't know who integrated this system, but they did not do it correctly. I talked to the media team and they said that their integrator had done the install for them. They had set it up to a certain point, and then they had given them a only 2 hour session on how to use the X32, and they'd left them in the dust, and that's it. So all this media team knew how to do was push faders. They didn't know how to they didn't know how to set gain. They didn't know how to use the EQ. The compressor wasn't even on the mixer. The PA wasn't tuned. And so they were afraid to set the gain higher because the PA wasn't tuned, so they would get feedback. And so that first Sabbath ended up being getting that mixer to a point where I could use it the next week, and along the way teaching them little bits here and there where I could, how to use this mixer, and like speaking into the mic and showing them what the EQ did. But this was already very late on a Sabbath afternoon, and everyone was
Yeah,
tired and wanted to go home.
I
And
can
so,
see. I can see the
yeah,
challenges you could have faced at that point. Tell us about
yeah,
the team that you're working with there.
Yeah, they had no training whatsoever on how to use this mixer, as I said. They only had a 2 hour, like, briefer, more like than training on the X32 by this integrator. And so,
I'm guessing that's the person who sold it to them?
yeah,
Right.
I don't even know if it's supposed to be called an integrator, maybe just a supplier. So the
Yeah.
supplier just dropped it in, connected it to their system, routed the audio to the different speakers, and then left them to figure it out on their own mostly. And so they didn't really know how to use this mixer.
Yeah, I mean, this is a digital mixer. I'm just looking at the
Yeah.
specs for it now. Of course, got it's pretty much got everything on it. But
Yep.
when you have a digital console like this one, it has a lot of, it's got a large learning curve,
Yes.
which is why it's good to start off with an analog console when you're beginning too, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
for someone who's supplying gear like that, maybe he should have considered that, right? Don't you think?
Yeah, or even giving them a
Hmm.
simpler digital console like the old series from Allen and Heath or their CQ18T, which are really a direct upgrade from an analog system where the routing is patched 1 to 1, like mic one comes in on channel one right away, and you push the main fader and it goes right to the speakers right away. And so they were not set up for success. And so that first session, I just had to get the mixer to a point where we could use it the next Sabbath. And then the next Sabbath, I came back. Instead of attending my church, I went to their church. And from Sabbath school in the morning, I worked on the mixer to prepare it for our choir. And it just so happened that that week, they had another choir come in during divine service and have a full concert. And so I was able to build a mix for that choir and use it for our choir in the afternoon. And all the while I was showing them how to like set gain, how to set the EQ, and even just labeling each channel properly on the scribble strips, setting the gain correctly and putting a high pass filter. And they were already commenting that, wow, this sounds so much better
Amazing.
because it was getting to the correct loudness for the room, whereas they were running it really, really quietly and trying to push the faders up. And another problem that we faced was that their cables that the supplier chose were not really high quality. And so we were getting radio
Interference.
interference where we were having like a station next door come in, and we could hear the news over the PA.
You are
And
kidding.
yeah, and everyone in the room was asking like, what's that noise? Who's speaking? And we just had to say, oh, this is maybe a radio station next door because
Yeah.
we had set the gain correctly. And so it was picking up the interference from next door.
So they weren't
And
shielded cables.
no, they were just probably like the cheapest
Yeah.
XLRs that you could get.
Oh man,
Yeah.
that is
So
shocking.
yeah, so in the afternoon, the what I said, the two wireless mics coming in on one receiver, they didn't know that. And so they couldn't tell me that. They had
Oh,
like they had three sets of wireless mics. They had four wireless mics. Two were plugged into the booth like directly. They had a budget Shure system. The other one was a JBL like wireless receiver at the front. It was plugged into the stage box. And I only discovered when I was mixing the tracks after the fact that two mics were
okay.
coming in on that one
On that one
receiver,
receiver. Yeah.
and nobody knew.
How do you
And
not know that? That's kind of an obvious thing when you're looking at the mixer, isn't it?
no, because they patched that thing twice. They patched it into two channels, assuming that it could split into two because two mics are coming into on the same mono input. And so they assumed that it would go into two channels. And so I was trying to mix for two people, and it turns out I was mixing one single receiver. And so I found out after the fact, and I was just shocked that the person who had supplied them this system or whoever had gone out and bought these wireless mics had not had the knowledge to know that you're not supposed to have two mics on one channel because you won't be able to mix it properly.
right after. Yeah. How did you end up overcoming that challenge?
So in the end, we just had to run with whatever we had set. The choir did come through the speakers okay, but the room wasn't treated either, so we were fighting feedback, we were trying to sing loudly, the piano wasn't balanced. But then after the fact, I took those tracks and I mixed them for post. We were able to get a really good recording out of that. So what I left the church with was a place where they could, like a starting point where the gain was set correctly. I taught them to set the gain, I taught them to set the high pass filter, and then I offered if they ever had time, I could come back and work with their team on how to use this mixer properly.
What lessons did you learn from that?
Um, Not to assume that just because a church has good equipment means that they have it routed properly, means that they have it set up properly, and that they know how to use it. I heard the name of the mixer from someone I was in contact with, and I said, "Oh, they've chosen a good mixer for this church. That must mean that their sound is good and they know how to use it." And so I just came a week prior. What I took away from this is that every time we have an event at another place, I have to assume that I'm working from the ground up and that I need to build a new mix for this event. And I have to treat it as though I'm working from scratch with a new church rather than trying to do it, trying to just go there like a week prior and figure out everything in very little time. I have to go earlier and set myself up for more success, set the church up for more success with these projects.
I want to explore some of those things that some more lessons that you have learned over the years as well. What tips would you give to somebody who is involved in the local church and would like to improve the sound quality of their audio system? Let's imagine that it's somebody who is being maybe just put in that position, doesn't really
Mm.
understand much of the basics of audio live sound mixing. Do you have any like standard? I mean, we talked a bit about how you help the church that you were working in the past. You know, we talked about setting the gain, you know, EQ compression. Is there any like tips that you would give somebody when it comes to gain staging? Like, let's start with the gain staging. I think maybe you can
Yeah,
help people to understand what that means and what they should be looking for when setting their input gain.
yeah. So gain staging is the way you balance volume in versus volume out. And so if you look at it from, let's say, a video, if you look at it from, let's say, a video point of view, you have your exposure triangle where you have your ISO, which is the sensitivity of your sensor. You have your shutter speed, how fast the shutter clicks, and you have the aperture of your lens, which is like how wide the aperture is set so that you get your depth of field and how much light you're letting in. The same thing applies with audio in that you don't want your image to be overexposed, but you don't want your image to be underexposed either. And so you have to set your gain so that you have a healthy level of signal coming in so that when you send the audio to your speakers, you're not introducing a lot of noise from your mixers, electrical systems, or you're not sending so much volume in that you're overloading the circuitry of your mixer or the converters in your mixer and it just gets so distorted. You have to set your gain to a healthy level, and on analog that's at zero dB. If you push the pre-fader listen, the PAFL or solo button on your channels, you will get on analog mixers, you'll get the meters will start showing the signal of that input, and you want to set that input so that it peaks at around zero, because if it goes past that, you get analog distortion, which is okay more okay on analog consoles than digital. On digital, you have to be very careful not to clip, because if you do clip, that's not recoverable. On analog, actually, there are times that you do want it to like distort and you get different sounds out of it. But on digital, the hard rule is either minus 18 or minus 12 on the gain. So you want to, or on Allen and Heath, they set it more for analog, so it's also 0. But between digital and analog, the same thing applies where you want to set the level where the volume coming in peaks, like the most it goes to is around the yellow part, so that if somebody like really really yells into the mic, it still doesn't go past 0 and clip horribly.
So, what could be the case with a church that does not have the correct gain staging? Like, what could be some of those telltale signs?
Either you get mics that sound like, the typical streamer yelling into the mic and it sounds really distorted. A lot of live streams tend to sound the same way when churches haven't really learned or don't have the knowledge how to live stream. A lot of the time they want to set gain really hot so that it's loud enough to hear in the room. But then on the live stream that translates more so than in the room. It's heard in the room too. But on the live stream you don't have the room noise. So it's very obvious that it's clipping. And then the other side of things is when they're scared to set gain loud to a healthy level because of feedback in the room, because they haven't done anything with they haven't treated the room or they haven't tuned their PA. And so they don't set gain loud enough. And the telltale sign of that is the fader is at maximum. It's still not loud enough. And so you have to get it to a point where your fader is at 0.
Yeah.
You're mixing at unity so that every little move you make is noticeable. Because the faders they don't have a linear scale. If you look at your fader, you go to church and you look at your fader on the mixer, the distance between 0 and 5 or 0 and minus 5 is a lot bigger than the distance between minus 10 and minus 20. And so you want to set your gain so that you're mixing around 0, so
Yeah.
that whatever small moves you make on your faders translate to what you hear in the room. And that also makes it so that you have a healthy signal going to your live stream that's not too noisy or distorted.
I see that happening a lot in churches where they are trying, if it's a bit too quiet, then they'll just bump it up on the faders, you know what I mean? So they're trying to
Yeah,
compensate with the faders. But
yeah,
what you're saying here is that you have a problem not with the fader. That's you if the signal itself is on a lower gain level, then that
yeah,
needs to be adjusted first according to the input signal that's coming. Because it really does. It's why it's so important that we have rehearsals and things like that, so then we can understand how much we need to put into the microphone in order for it to adjust it to the right level for the musicians who are playing. Um, and kind of like why I'm always I always stress when we have musicians, come on guys, let's do a sound check before you go on stage, because unless we are getting you up there and checking you, we're going to have problems in the gain stage. And so for all the musicians who are out there listening, don't feel like it's a waste of time or something for you when the audio technician tells you to go up there and do a sound check, because it's going to help you guys to be heard much more clearer, and it's going to help the experience for everyone to be much better if we set the
yeah.
gain stage at the correct in the very beginning when we do rehearsal. So that's, I guess, in essence, why we have those sound checks, isn't it?
Yep. I think that's another thing I was going to say is that you need to show up for sound. You can't just show up for video and the live stream, because the gospel is meant to be heard. You don't watch the gospel, you listen, you hear the gospel. And one thing I was thinking about when I was preparing for this podcast is that deaf people might actually have a better experience with the resources that they have, because we actually have video in our church down so pat. We have it down pat. We have our exposure set correctly. And so those who might not be able to hear might be actually at an advantage when it comes to our live streams, because they have the assisted, they have the ministries which cater towards them and have been worked towards a level where it's very understandable and you can get the message across clearly. Whereas with audio, we don't have that much knowledge about it in our church overall, I'd say. We know so much about video, we know how to set exposure and all of that. But then when it comes to audio, we're trying to, let's put it in the video context, where we either have it overexposed and then try to declip in the recording in like Lightroom. You try to bring the brightness down, or you have it so dark that your blacks are clipped and you try to bring it up in Lightroom. And it's not the same as if you set your exposure correctly
when you first when you
when you
first record
first
it.
capture it, when
Yeah.
you first record it. And so it's so important to show up during the week if you can. You can go to your church and learn to use your mixer when there's no one around, and you don't really get embarrassed about it. Like if there's feedback, you learn that setting too much gain gives you feedback, or turning up the EQ like this gives you feedback. And so in your free time, try to learn audio as well.
I
And
I agree.
yeah,
I agree. And I really love talking to you about this. By the way, it's for me. It's a bit of a hobby of mine. What other tips? Where else should we go with this? Is there any other areas that you would like to explore?
I think besides learning gain staging, musicians can go a long way, like the audio team can go a long way with learning what the basic tools on the mixer do. Like learning that you should set a high pass around 120 hertz to cut off the aircon rumble in the room, or cut off the mics, like the handling mic noise of the mics. Learning that cutting a bit around 500 to 800 hertz makes people have more clarity in their voice. Or if they sound harsh, you should cut around like 2 to 3 kilohertz. Simple basic tips like this, where they might not be able to hear it at first. Over time, you will learn to hear it. Just knowing that mixing with numbers at first, more like preset settings, just knowing that doing this, a bit of this, will benefit the sound. Learning that if you set a compressor threshold below so that the gain reduction is a certain amount, will prevent my live stream viewers' ears from getting destroyed when someone yells into a mic, or when music gets too loud, it automatically ducks it for you. Just learning the basics, learning at least how to use your equipment, and really putting in the time and effort to learning it outside of church, so that you can bring your best effort and you can serve the gospel and serve the message that our church has in the best way possible.
What's your plans for the next 5 years, Andrew? Like, do you have any projects that you're working on to help musicians and churches to improve their sound?
Yeah, something that I've been thinking about for the past couple of months is how local church musicians are very, very talented, but they do not necessarily have the platform to record and release music. And that's something that with Mana House, one of your previous guests, they created this space where musicians can come in for free, record, and if they don't have a mix engineer, they can mix for them as well. And so my idea is to create a global network of Adventist music creatives, writers, producers, engineers, both mixing and mastering, to create support for these musicians to be able to release their music if they don't have the financial means to. And I also want this network to provide consulting for churches so that eventually musicians can just go to their local church to record a song. I want to create this network of audio engineers who could consult with what gear is needed. I think it would be good to have end-to-end audio integration with this network of audio engineers and people in the church who might be structural engineers, who might be engineers in that they treat acoustics for the room. The sound would sound good in the room because it's been integrated properly and the team knows how to mix. And then after church, maybe during AY, the church musicians could go and use the same equipment to record music that they want to share. And all in all, it would be a big step forward, I think, for our church to getting our message out there in both spoken word and song.
I love the concept that you just explained. If people wanted to get involved, how could they get in touch with you?
I'm on Instagram at AndrewCMGY, and I also recently started a church audio account at Church Audio Asia, where I have this more unique insight into churches in Thailand and the Philippines, and I know more of the challenges that we face here. And so I want to start out by focusing on our churches here in Southeast Asia that may not have the same support that churches in the West may have. There's a link in my bio on the audio account where people can book a 30-minute session just for a consultation or to see how we can work together.
Yeah, and I'll also put that link down in the bottom of the description as well here. So
Yeah.
if you would like to get in touch with Andrew to work on any projects in your local churches, could be in Southeast Asia, right? Could be in the Pacific. Please reach out to him. I know that he would definitely be able to help you with any issues that you may be having in your audio. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have learned a lot from this episode. I regularly do the audio for my church as well, so it's really good to be able to hear some of these things that some of these tips and ways to optimize your church audio. Of course, this is not all conclusive.
No.
We couldn't give an exhaustive description of everything that could be done for your church. There's so many things that we could cover, but I hope that this is an encouragement for you to learn more about the audio side of things in your music ministries. So, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast, Andrew. It's been nice to chat with you.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, and I look forward to doing this again one time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Maybe if you guys want Andrew to come back on the podcast, if you have any questions regarding audio, anything audio, I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer them. So you guys can leave a comment on this podcast, or you can leave a comment on our social media, Instagram, where we post the reels and stuff like that for this episode. And we would love to hear back from you if you have any other questions regarding it. Be able to get them on to answer them. We'll keep it there for now. And yeah, so thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Andrew. We'll see you next time on the Adventist Music Podcast.